Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The future of the fairgrounds and the Coliseum tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining me. Tonight we have Marvin Stockwell from the Coliseum Coalition. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And also Earl Williams, chairman of the local chapter of the Urban Land Institute. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with Memphis Daily News. So let's talk a little bit about Save the Coliseum. Let's start there. Why?
Sure. Well, we want to see it put to good use for all Memphians. We want to see it back earning revenue, bringing in tax revenue for the city. We just think that if we haven't come up with a plan that everyone in Memphis can get behind, that plays off our core brands of music, basketball, and wrestling in a way that saves the Coliseum and puts it to good use for all of Memphis, then we're not thinking hard enough. Is the short answer.
And so far, I mean, there's been some shifting landscape in terms of the politics of this.
Right.
Leaders, first, there's the city came out and said, look, we need to tear it down.
Sure.
It's too expensive. Nostalgia's great, history's great, but we need a new, useful, multi-purpose arena on the site.
Sure.
Why isn't it just a matter of nostalgia? You know, why does nostalgia or history mean that we should save that building?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I know a lot of people have brought that up. And let me just dispel that from the get-go. This is not about nostalgia. This is about repurposing the historic Mid-South Coliseum and putting it to good use. We just don't think that there's been thorough enough thought that's inclusive of enough people's viewpoint to say that the Mid-South Coliseum is no longer useful. 8 years ago, it was hosting events. I'm not sitting here with a plan in mind, because there are a lot of variables that need to be, the ADA compliance, the non-compete, all of which you could probably fill a 30-minute
the non-compete with FedEx Forum. Yeah,
that's right. But I just think it would be a shame to raise the Coliseum when it has so much earning potential. This is not about the past and whether you saw the Beatles or AC/DC there. This is about the future.
Yeah, and have you, as this conversation has gone on, it seems like some political leaders are a little bit more receptive to the idea that maybe this needs to be incorporated. Is that your sense?
I mean, that's encouraging. Mayor Wharton said he's not hell-bent on destroying the Coliseum. That's great. And Robert Lipscomb has said, I don't have a dog in this fight, and that's the reason he's asked the Urban Land Institute to come down here and be kind of an impartial voice. All of that is really encouraging. I mean, make no mistake. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Mayor Wharton. We've seen him respond to grassroots movements in the past, and on balance do what's smart. Take the bike lane issue. He heard all sides, and then he stepped out in front and under his leadership, Memphis has gone from one of the worst bicycling cities in the U.S. to one of the most improved. So we're encouraged by the fact that somebody said, let's not rush to judgment. Let's study the issue thoroughly. Right. That's what we want to see.
And so, Earl, let me clarify. Urban Land Institute, you're the head of the local chapter.
That is
the mayor's office, Robert Lipscomb, has asked the national group to take a look at this project. It's not clear at this point whether you all will be involved. Some people say, well, if the national group's going to get involved, the locals will. But we don't know that yet. So just so everyone understands that. So in a more general sense, from the Urban Land Institute's point of view, why don't we do this? What is the Urban Land Institute? What is the mission of it? What does it do nationally and locally? Let's start there.
Well, Urban Land Institute is an organization that next year celebrates its 80th anniversary. So it's been around for a long time. It's a nonprofit focusing on research and educational. And its mission is really providing leadership in the responsible use of land and also generating thriving communities that are going to stand the test of time, both worldwide, locally, and primarily from an urban environment. So dial that down. What does that mean? I went to New York for our fall conference this past year, and one of the things that I learned that really surprised me, and one of the things that I don't think most people have thought about is that what the economists are saying is that in the year 2050, which seems like a long time from now, but really isn't, that 80% of the world's population, and this is also true for the U.S., are going to live in urban areas. So that means there's a huge opportunity or come into the urban areas to be leaders, if you would. And you've had some discussions with Scott Morris, I know, mentioned with Church Health Center, the brain drain that we've had in Memphis, and there's a lot of urban redevelopment going on in Memphis. And I think it's an exciting time to be in Memphis, to be quite honest. Yeah. And so this is another opportunity to take a look at a public facility, if you would. It's owned by the city, and figure out what to do with that project that is going to be the highest and best use for our community.
Okay, and I should say too, you're by day COO of Loeb Properties.
Correct.
Loeb has done all kinds of developments all over the area. Most recently, an urban project, which is Overton Square.
Correct.
So I should say that and get that out there. But when Urban Land Institute looks at projects like this, and what are the kind of criteria that they want to weigh? I mean, and where does historic significance come in to a project like this?
Well, from a national perspective, they're going to look at it completely different than what we might look at from a local perspective. Because let's face it, from a local perspective, we all have the history. We have local politics, we've got our biases that we bring into it. And so the thing about bringing in the national organization is that they don't bring any of that. Mm-hmm. They bring the best practices from other cities, and we're 33,000 members strong. So they've got a huge pool of talent to draw from. And what they will do is they will go to that talent pool, take a look at the needs that the city has and what's being asked of them, look at the type of requirements that are needed, and then go to their talent pool and bring those people into Memphis and ask them to take a look at this project.
Are there other projects the National Group has looked at in the past in Memphis? Give some examples and then I'll go to
Well, if you take a look at the website, you'll see about 14, 15 projects that they did on a national level last year, anywhere from Clearwater, Florida, up to Seattle, Washington. And the projects are different. I mean, sometimes they're focused on infrastructure issues, sometimes they're looking at housing, sometimes transportation. So each project brings its own unique set of challenges and opportunities, and that's no different than the fairgrounds. Yeah, and so we're going to have an opportunity for somebody to come and take a look at it. And I commend Robert for what he's doing. I think it's a great idea for him to step back and to say, let's bring in some national expertise, take a look at what we're proposing, but also take a look at it and see if this is the highest and best use for this community property. And so I think it's a great thing that he's done to step back and say, I've got my ideas.
Sure.
But let's see what somebody else might say.
Marvin, and then we're going to...
Yeah, I'm just really encouraged to hear you say that. And one of the things that I would hope that the Urban Land Institute would take a look at, and I can't imagine they wouldn't, is the fact that we do have these two trend lines. One is a decline in youth sports, according to the Wall Street Journal. At the same time, everyone has the internet. We're all doing web searches. You can see that other municipalities are starting to restore their Coliseum-era venues and put them to good, productive use. So again, the history part of it is to me is a bonus. No one is thinking we should do it for that reason alone. That is the kind of icing on the cake. We have to find a good business use to repurpose the Coliseum, and there's so many variables, and there are tons of ideas, and I wouldn't sit here and tell you I knew which one it was.
Yeah, Bill.
Earl, let's talk time frame on this, because as I understand it, the panel, once assembled, basically does this over a week's time. Am I correct in that? And then at the end of that, come to some preliminary recommendations on this?
I'm not sure of the exact timing. Some of that depends on what the contract provides. But typically what they will do is come to a city, and they will take a look at the project, obviously firsthand, and then also speak with the local participants and those that are involved. And then they'll do their research, and then they'll come back with some type of a recommendation to the city in terms of what they believe.
Okay. Marvin, you've talked about the Coliseum. Where do you think the Coliseum fits for the fairgrounds as a whole? Because we're talking about 170 acres of land here. So Is there a larger way that the Coliseum fits or influences the future of the fairgrounds?
Sure, I think the Coliseum would make a great anchor, for future development of any type, and we got to take the long view and realize a lot's going to happen with the fairgrounds, perhaps over the next 50 years, 100 years. It would make a great kind of historically important mid-century architecture anchor, provided it can be put to really good use. No one wants to see the Coliseum saved but be nestled inside of an overall development that doesn't work. So obviously we're concerned, we have our opinions member to member, person to person about the overall fairgrounds redevelopment. And I guess I would just say, I would want that to be an inclusive process where all viewpoints are heard. And people might say, we've had public input till we're blue in the face, but what that overlooks is the fact that most of that input was years ago. Our world has changed. Our city has certainly changed for the better. And we've been through a recession. Details of the plan have changed. So I think we're due for a fresh round of input. Memphis is on a roll. Great developments from Overton Square to Sears Crosstown to Saving the Chiska to the Green Line to you name it. So I just think Memphians are not willing to accept a plan that's been around for this long and hasn't had sufficient input.
Earl, in terms of the context of any project like this, is 170 acres with a 65,000 seat football stadium, a 12,000 seat arena that's been mothballed, is that more daunting in terms of coming up with a plan than just one Coliseum or one Liberty Bowl?
I'm sure that it is. I mean, one of the technical assistance panels that I noticed on last year's ULI schedule was something to do with the Houston Astrodome. So they've dealt with these type of projects before. Every project's unique. Every city's unique. And so I think that we've got the expertise to bring in to take a look at it, and it's got to be looked at from a holistic standpoint. You can't just look at the Coliseum. You can't just look at the Liberty Bowl Stadium. You've got to take a look at the entire development and say, what is going to work? And it needs to be a project that works financially for Memphis. We have to have a project that you can sit back and look at the end of the day and says, this is going to work for the community, because it's community asset, but at the same time, it's got to work from a financial standpoint also, because some way those bonds have to be paid and that development has to be paid for and has to be self-sustaining.
And we joked before the show that you are, at Loeb, you're not a planner, you're the bean counter.
I am.
And so, with that, I'll put you on the spot. To some degree, you all must have gone through that at Loeb, and when you're looking at Overton Square, because Bob Loeb, who spearheaded the project, obviously will be the first to say he just fell in love with it. But someone, and maybe it was you, had to say, Bob, we got to do a spreadsheet on this. The nostalgia people feel, the history people feel, the beauty of a historic property couldn't be enough to make that project work. Is that right?
It is very difficult. We had a 4-1 vote. I won't tell you which one vote was kind of like, maybe we need to step back and take a look at this in our office. But Bob and Lou both fell in love with Overton Square. And look, redevelopment is tough. It's a whole lot easier to go buy a shopping center in East Memphis and renovate it and do things to it than it is to take something that's been vacant for quite some period of time, old structures that have a lot of hidden cost, and it's just not easy to do. And Crosstown, I can't wait to see what that becomes. I mean, that's going to be an exciting facility, and Bass Pro opening up. Memphis has a lot going on. But we need to. I mean, if we want people to come back to the core city and to get involved, we need bike trails, we need parks, we need public access, we need the ability for people to be able to get around. And when you think about movement within a city, it's not just automobiles. It's bikes, it's pedestrians, it's ADA that needs to be considered. So there are a lot of different things that ULI has been involved with that have worked toward those things to make it a very walkable community.
Well, again, back to the ULI perspective, and you may not be able to answer this, but one of the criticisms people have had of the city's plan so far is that they feel like it's a little bit backwards, that there's this grand plan, and then we're going to put it forward. We're going to go to Nashville and get it declared a tourism development zone, which funnels a whole lot of tax revenue back into the project. And once we have that tourism development zone established, then we're going to look for a developer. And that is, I think, and we're going to fill in the details. And that has, and you're nodding, Marvin, that has a lot of people nervous that, it seems backwards. Do you have any sense of what ULI's perspective on the pros and cons of having a developer name before you launch into a big project versus after? I mean,
I don't know that I can address that specifically. Sure. What I can say is that if you take a look at the development that's taken place around Memphis and what has worked in other cities, public-private partnerships are becoming the norm.
Overton Square was a public-private project in part because there's a big public investment in that partnership.
is one, and so is Crosstown.
Yeah.
So public-private is a wonderful way to do redevelopment in a city. You let each entity do what they do best. City has, the things that they do well. Obviously, private business has things that they do well.
Right.
And when you can merge those two strengths together and come up with a plan, then I think it works very well for the city, and I think it's a win-win. We're going to have to figure out what makes sense overall. And then I think when you get an idea of maybe what this development might look like, then you can go and look at the developers that have the expertise in these areas and bring them in at that time.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's necessarily critical at this time that we have them identified. I think it's more important that we figure out what is the highest and best use of that property.
You were nodding a little bit. I mean, that is, we haven't talked about this, but that concern and criticism people have had that it seems backwards. Well, let's go declare it a zone, get the money, and then we'll fill in the details.
Sure, it's just hard to hear. Trust us, it's going to be great, and then say, but we got to go get this money. I just think that any economics class or any business development class, that strategy would not be approved. I'm not understanding necessarily the intricacies of public-private partnerships and how municipalities work. It just seems foolish to me, and I have heard from several people who don't want to go on record. Talked to a prominent tenant in Overton Square that's worried about well, wait a minute, they're going to take the sales tax revenue from Overton Square. I thought that was going to be used within Overton Square. I thought we were going to try to maybe use some of that money to add on to our parking garage. There are a lot of misgivings. There are people within these youth sports complexes that to you will tell you that they have real concerns about it, how it's going to affect their business. Yet the city says, oh, they're all on board, yet they're not named. It's like, I think people are taking a wait and see attitude because they don't want to be caught on the wrong side of a given dispute. And given the city's track record, let's see, who are you going to bet on? The activists who are trying to save the Coliseum or the city? I mean, the odds are in the city's favor. So people are taking a tight-lipped public stance, but yet privately they'll tell you they have huge concerns.
Yeah.
But don't quote me on that, they'll say. You didn't hear it from me.
I just quoted you on that on TV. We are on TV, but
Bill. Earl, is a blank slate better to work with? And the reason I raise that is because several years ago when Fairground LLC was put together to work on this, Henry Turley, who was one of the partners in it, had some real concerns because the Kroc Center, which the Salvation Army operates, was just starting construction there. And Henry wasn't so sure that was a good idea to go ahead and start construction prior to having a plan for the rest of the property.
What's done is done. I mean, the Kroc Center is built, it's operational. So what we have to do is take what's there now and figure out what to do going forward. And so I think it's easy enough to take a look at the existing plan and say, does it need to be updated? I mean, a lot has changed in the world since the 2008, 2009, 2010 recession. Things that could have been done before then may not be possible now. And so I think we're just going to have to step back from it and take a look and see whether or not the development that Robert has put forth is something that's feasible. If not, what might be feasible? And the nice thing about bringing ULI in is we don't come in with a mindset of this is what it has to be. It really is more of a blank look. Show us what you've got, tell us what you're thinking about, and let us go look at what's been successful in other cities and with experts in the area and come back to you with a proposal. And if that saves the Coliseum, great. If it doesn't, then it's just not part of the plan. But somewhere, somebody that's got the expertise needs to be taking a look at this. And I commend Robert for being willing to step back from
it. And these national panels, from what I've seen, ULI has been doing these since about 1948. As I understand it, and they have a history of sometimes saying yeah, this plan is right, but they also have a history on some projects of looking at it and saying, we don't think you ought to do it. For instance, a light rail link between LaGuardia and JFK airports in New York City that the port authorities there were all in favor of. The ULI panel said, we don't really see a need for that. So the panel sometimes goes in a direction that really is not choice A or choice B.
Correct. And you know, that, as I said, every city is different, every project is different. And you know, you're bringing in people from outside this city that really have no knowledge or history of what's gone on at the fairgrounds. And so they're going to look at it from a completely different perspective than those of us that have lived here for many years that have grown up with it. So I think it's exciting. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to hearing what the recommendations are.
There's been some talk of, and I don't know if it would be your group, but folks aligned with you certainly, that they want a chance to do some what's called pre-vitalization activities. And so by that, you know, you look at Broad Avenue before it was redeveloped. The community got together and had some street fairs and had some and just got some activity going. Crosstown did it, and we should say by day you work at Church Health Center, which is going to be one of the main an anchor tenant at Crosstown. Crosstown, they had, you know, I always joke they had poetry slams and a basement across the street, and they kind of built from there and built this tremendous excitement. And there's the brewery Untapped downtown, where they had this beer garden, and it got people involved. And if I'm not mistaken, Billy Orgel, who is putting a ton of money in and redeveloping the beer garden, redeveloping the brewery, it was in part because he went down there with some friends and had a beer and said, wow, I'd never been in here, and this is this amazingly active place, and I think maybe this makes sense. Long introduction to that question, but you all are, I mean, the word on the street is you guys would like that chance to do something in there to show some activity before a bunch of money is put in. And that was one of the keys about all three of those examples. It was just the money that it took to do that little event, not a $30 million investment, and then we'll believe it when we see it.
Right. I think we're not the only ones who want to do a pre-vitalizing event in the Coliseum. The I Love Memphis blog just put out a post the other day that was about buildings and properties they'd like to see untapped. And I think Taylor Berger did a great job, and the others involved in the project with the Tennessee Brewery Untapped. New face for an old Broad led to the resurgence of Broad Avenue. I think when people's imaginations are woken up about the possibilities of a property, then they start to imagine the use. I mean, you know, your right brain is when your visual memory, and when you see things, you think about things differently. And I think when people got into the brewery and said, golly, this place is awesome, then all of a sudden you found the collective will to redevelop the property, and an investor came forward. So absolutely, I would like to see some more than one pre-vitalizing event. And Taylor and others at the Tennessee Brewery were smart to couch the brewery project in this context, which is, hey, let's open the place back up, give some people the chance to be in the space. If an investor comes forward, great. If it doesn't, we've given it a proper send-off. I think the same could be for any of these untapped things. You want to at least give citizens the chance to be in that space, and then if an investor comes forward, or if we find a deal that works, that repurposes the Coliseum, puts it to good use, then all the better.
Right. I should say, just 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes left in the show. Your take from a ULI perspective, and even from a low properties perspective, on this idea of these kind of community grassroots sort of support for these things. You must love that if you're a potential investor. I mean, that's
absolutely
a green light.
Absolutely, because it gives you some sense of gauge of the community and what they're looking for. I mean, let's face it, one reason Overton Square was redeveloped is because the community wanted it to be redeveloped. There was a lot of discussions for the previous owners of kind of just flattening it out and bringing in a grocery store, doing some other things, and the community wasn't in favor of that. And so one of the reasons that we think Overton Square has been successful is because it was embraced by the community long before we got there.
Yeah.
And we simply just, if you did, fulfilled their wish in terms of revitalizing it, and you know, it's been a great project for us.
2 minutes left, Bill.
Bob's been on the program before, and we've kind of talked about this thing of coexistence between Overton Square and the fairgrounds. And his point, I think, at the time was that Overton Square is a different kind of land use, more intense, smaller than perhaps the fairgrounds is. Agree?
We would agree. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the development opportunities that they've looked at the fairground differ completely than what we've looked at Overton Square. And so I think they're going to be two different types of development completely.
Marvin, how hard is the Coliseum Coalition going to come at this preliminary city estimate that it takes $30 million to reopen the Coliseum for public use?
Well, we would like to see some architects with structural experience be able to get in and do a third-party assessment. I think that would be prudent, but honestly, you know, like the figures I've heard is $30 million to restore it, $33 million to destroy it and build a new one. To me, why wouldn't we spend $3 million less and have a revitalized Coliseum that's put to good use, but also has all of the historical anchor to it? Like I said, the icing on the cake.
And one of the folks who work within the Coliseum, Save the Coliseum, pointed out that it was originally going to be $50 million to renovate the Liberty Bowl. By the end of the day, it was more like $10 million. My numbers might be slightly off, but I guess that.
Sure. I mean, figures that are stated when you have a mindset of like we're trying to make the case to demolish something, and what they actually are vastly different.
Okay. All right. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Bill.
much.
Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.
Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.